Dr. Amy Rodriguez had just finished her 3 years of medical training when she got assigned to work at the fanciest part of City General Hospital. This was the private wing where rich people came for treatment, and everything was different here. The hallways were quieter, the rooms were bigger, and even the coffee in the break room tasted better. Amy was nervous on her first day. She had grown up in a small town where her family ran a local diner, and now she was treating millionaires and business executives. Her white coat still felt stiff and new, and she kept checking her reflection to make sure she looked professional enough. The head nurse, Mrs. Thompson, showed Amy around the wing. "You'll have 12 patients to start with," she explained as they walked down the marble-floored corridor. "Most of them are recovering from surgeries or getting special treatments. But there's one patient who's been here longer than anyone else." They stopped in front of room 317. Through the glass window, Amy could see a woman lying perfectly still in a hospital bed. The room looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a medical facility. Fresh white roses sat on the windowsill, expensive paintings hung on the walls, and soft classical music played from hidden speakers. "That's Isabella Whitmore," Mrs. Thompson said quietly. "She's been in a coma for 8 months now. Car accident on the interstate. Her family owns half the real estate downtown, so they've made sure she gets the best of everything." Amy pressed closer to the window. The woman looked to be in her mid-40s with dark hair spread across a silk pillowcase. Even unconscious, she had an elegant look about her. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured, and someone had applied light makeup to her face. "Does she ever respond to anything?" Amy asked. Mrs. Thompson shook her head. "Nothing at all. The neurologists have run every test imaginable. Brain scans, nerve tests, you name it. She's completely unresponsive. Her husband visits every single day, though. Reads to her, talks to her, brings different flowers. Poor man still believes she'll wake up." Amy felt a strange pull toward the room. Maybe it was because Isabella looked so peaceful, or maybe it was the sad story, but something made her want to learn more. Over the next few days, Amy settled into her routine at the hospital. Most of her patients were recovering well and would go home soon. But Isabella's case fascinated her. During her rounds, Amy would always spend an extra few minutes in room 317, checking the monitors and observing the patient. Isabella's husband, Robert, was there almost every afternoon. He was a tall, well-dressed man in his 50s who always brought a different book to read aloud. Amy learned that Isabella owned 3 art galleries in the city and had been planning a big charity event when the accident happened. "The doctors say talking to her might help," Robert explained to Amy one day. "I don't know if she can hear me, but I keep hoping." Yesterday I told her about the new sculpture exhibit at the downtown gallery. She would have loved it. Amy noticed something that seemed odd. Isabella had various bandages from where the medical equipment was attached, and these needed to be changed regularly. But depending on which nurse did the job, Isabella's vital signs would change slightly. When Nurse Patricia, who was known for being rough and quick with patients, changed the bandages, Isabella's heart rate would go up a tiny bit. When gentle Nurse Maria did the same job, Isabella seemed more relaxed. At first, Amy thought she was imagining things. After all, everyone told her that coma patients couldn't feel anything. But she started keeping notes anyway, writing down the small changes in Isabella's breathing and heart rate during different procedures. "You're spending a lot of time with the Whitmore case," Dr. Peterson, the senior physician, mentioned during a staff meeting. "Don't get too attached. Some patients just don't come back no matter how much money their families spend." But Amy couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. During her medical training, she had learned that the human brain was incredibly complex and that doctors still didn't understand everything about consciousness. What if Isabella could sense more than anyone realized? Amy started doing some research in her free time. She read medical journals about coma patients and found several cases where people had recovered after months or even years of being unresponsive. Some of these patients later said they had been aware of conversations and events around them, even though they couldn't show it. One evening, Amy was working late when she decided to visit Isabella's room. Robert had gone home for the night and the wing was quiet except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Amy sat in the chair next to Isabella's bed and studied her peaceful face. "I wonder what you're thinking about in there," Amy said quietly. "Your husband really loves you, you know. He told me you two were planning a trip to Italy next month. He still has the tickets." As Amy spoke, she noticed the slightest change in Isabella's breathing pattern. It was so small that the monitors didn't pick it up, but Amy's trained eye caught it. She leaned forward and continued talking. I heard you love art. I wish I knew more about it, but I grew up in a small town where the fanciest thing we had was a mural on the side of the post office. My mom always said I should visit more museums. Again, there was a tiny shift in Isabella's breathing. Amy's heart started beating faster. Was she really seeing these changes, or was it just wishful thinking? Over the following weeks, Amy made it a point to spend time with Isabella during her rounds. She would update her on the weather, tell her about interesting patients, or share stories from her own life. Each time she noticed those small, almost invisible responses, the other nurses thought Amy was wasting her time. Honey, she's been like that for months, Nurse Patricia said. Save your energy for the patients who can actually get better. But Amy had a feeling that something important was happening. She started volunteering to change Isabella's bandages herself, always talking gently during the process and explaining what she was doing. I'm just going to clean this area and put on a fresh bandage, she would say. This might feel a little cool, but it'll be over quickly. Isabella's family had noticed Amy's dedication. Robert started asking specifically for her when he visited. That young doctor really cares about Isabella, he told his sister-in-law. She talks to her like she's awake. It's nice to see someone who hasn't given up hope. Amy's supervisor wasn't entirely happy about the extra time she spent with Isabella. You have other patients who need attention too, he reminded her. But Amy couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella was fighting to come back and just needed someone to believe in. Her little did Amy know that her gentle approach and caring words were about to lead to something that would shock everyone at the hospital and change medical thinking about coma patients forever. The breakthrough was coming, and it would happen during what seemed like a routine bandage change on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Dr. Amy Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that Isabella Whitmore was trying to communicate. After 3 weeks of careful observation, she had filled an entire notebook with tiny details that everyone else seemed to miss. The slight changes in breathing, the barely noticeable shifts in heart rate, the way Isabella's face seemed more peaceful when certain people were in the room. Amy knew she was walking on thin ice with her supervisors, but she couldn't ignore what she was seeing. Every morning she would review the previous day's notes before starting her rounds. The patterns were becoming clearer, and they all pointed to one impossible conclusion. Isabella might be more aware than anyone realized. The hospital's morning routine was always the same. Nurses would check vital signs, doctors would review charts, and the cleaning staff would quietly maintain the pristine private wing. But Amy had started arriving 30 minutes early just to spend extra time in room 317. She would sit beside Isabella's bed and talk softly about whatever came to mind. Good morning. Isabella, she would say, adjusting the woman's pillow slightly. It's Thursday and it looks like it might rain today. Your husband brought you purple orchids yesterday. They smell beautiful. During these quiet conversations, Amy began to notice something remarkable. Isabella's brain activity, as shown on the EEG machine, would show tiny spikes when Amy mentioned specific topics. References to art, her galleries, or her husband Robert seemed to create the strongest responses. But when Amy talked about medical procedures or hospital business, the readings stayed flat. Amy decided to test her theory more carefully. One morning she brought a small speaker and played different types of music in Isabella's room. Classical music, which Robert had mentioned was Isabella's favorite, caused subtle but measurable changes in her brainwaves. Pop music and rock songs produced no response at all. This is incredible, Amy whispered to herself, staring at the EEG readings. But when she tried to explain her findings to Dr. Peterson during rounds, he dismissed them completely. Dr. Rodriguez, you're reading too much into normal brain activity, he said firmly. Coma patients can't selectively respond to different stimuli. What you're seeing is just random neural firing. Please focus on your other patients, but Amy couldn't give up. She had grown up in a family that never quit on anything important, and this felt like the most important discovery of her medical career. Her grandmother used to say that sometimes you had to trust your gut, even when everyone else thought you were crazy. Amy started documenting everything more carefully. She created detailed charts showing Isabella's responses to different nurses, different times of day, and different types of interaction. The evidence was mounting, but she knew she needed more proof before anyone would take her seriously. The breakthrough came when Amy decided to involve Robert in her observations. She had been hesitant to give him false hope, but she felt he deserved to know what she was seeing. One afternoon, when he arrived for his daily visit, Amy asked if she could speak with him privately. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to show you something," Amy said, leading him to Isabella's bedside. "I've been noticing some patterns in Isabella's responses. They're very subtle, but I think she might be more aware than we initially thought." Robert's eyes filled with hope and fear at the same time. "What do you mean? Can she hear us?" Amy pulled out her notebook and showed him the chart she had been keeping. "When you read to her, her brain activity increases. When you hold her hand, her heart rate becomes more stable. And when certain nurses change her bandages roughly, she shows signs of stress." Robert studied the data with the intensity of a man who had been praying for any sign of hope for 8 months.
"Are you saying she's been conscious this whole time?"
"I don't know exactly what it means," Amy admitted, "but I think she's fighting to come back, and maybe we can help her by paying attention to these responses." Over the next few days, Amy and Robert worked together to test different approaches. Robert would read different passages from Isabella's favorite books while Amy monitored the machines. They discovered that romantic poetry produced stronger responses than technical articles. Stories about travel and art created more brain activity than news reports. Amy also noticed that Isabella seemed to respond differently to various physical touches. A gentle stroke on her arm caused her to relax, while medical procedures that involved moving her roughly caused obvious stress signs. It was as if she could feel everything, but couldn't show it in normal ways. The nursing staff began to notice Amy's unusual dedication to Isabella's case. Some were supportive, but others thought she was wasting time on false hope. Nurse Patricia cornered Amy in the break room one afternoon. "Honey, I've been doing this for 20 years, Patricia said bluntly. "I've seen families cling to every little sign, thinking their loved one is about to wake up. But this woman has been gone for 8 months. You're giving her husband false hope, and that's not fair." Amy felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. What if she was wrong? What if she was seeing patterns that didn't really exist? But every time she doubted herself, she would return to Isabella's room and see those subtle but consistent responses. Amy started researching more aggressively. She spent her evenings reading medical journals and case studies about consciousness in coma patients. She learned about something called covert consciousness, where patients appeared unresponsive but showed signs of awareness when tested with advanced brain imaging. One study particularly caught her attention. Researchers had used brain scans to communicate with coma patients by asking them to imagine playing tennis or walking through their house. The different mental activities created distinct patterns that could be detected on sophisticated equipment. Some patients who appeared completely unresponsive were actually able to answer yes or no questions using this method. Amy wondered if Isabella might be experiencing something similar. Maybe she was trapped inside a body that wouldn't respond, fully aware but unable to communicate. The thought was both hopeful and terrifying. Amy decided to take a more systematic approach to her observations. She created a detailed schedule for interacting with Isabella at different times of day, using different voices, tones, and topics. She began keeping track of not just the machine readings but also tiny physical signs that might indicate awareness. The most encouraging discovery came when Amy noticed that Isabella's eyes, while closed, would move slightly under her eyelids when certain people entered the room. When Robert arrived each day, there would be a subtle flutter. When Dr. Peterson did his brief checkups, there was no movement at all. Amy also started paying attention to Isabella's bandage changes more carefully. The woman had several small wounds from where medical equipment had been attached, and these bandages needed to be changed every few days. Amy noticed that Isabella's vital signs would spike with anxiety when she knew a rough nurse was approaching, even before the actual procedure began. This observation gave Amy an idea. What if Isabella could sense who was about to touch her? What if her awareness extended beyond just hearing and included some form of recognition? Amy decided that the next time Isabella needed her bandages changed, she would handle the procedure herself and pay extremely close attention to every response. Little did Amy know that this decision would lead to the most shocking moment of her medical career, and possibly save Isabella's life. Tuesday morning arrived with dark clouds gathering outside City General Hospital. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with theories about Isabella Whitmore's condition. She had spent weeks documenting every tiny response, every subtle sign that suggested consciousness beneath the surface. Today felt different somehow. though she couldn't explain why. Amy arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, her coffee still steaming in the paper cup. The private wing was quieter than normal, with most of the staff not yet starting their shifts. She made her way to room 317, where Isabella lay as peacefully as ever, surrounded by fresh white lilies that Robert had brought the evening before. The morning light filtered through the expensive curtains, casting soft shadows across Isabella's face. Amy checked the overnight charts and noticed that Isabella's sleep patterns had been more restless than usual. The night nurse had noted several periods where her brain activity had increased, though Isabella remained completely motionless. "Good morning, Isabella," Amy said softly as she entered the room. "I hope you had pleasant dreams. It looks like we might get some rain today, which should help the flowers in the hospital garden." As Amy spoke, she watched the EEG monitor carefully. There it was again, that subtle increase in brain activity when she used Isabella's name. Amy had seen this pattern dozens of times now, but today the response seemed stronger, more defined. Amy reviewed Isabella's medical chart and noticed that several of her bandages were due to be changed. These were small dressings covering areas where monitoring equipment had been attached to her skin. Normally, one of the nurses would handle this routine task, but Amy had specifically requested to do it herself. She gathered the necessary supplies from the medical cart: fresh gauze, antiseptic solution, medical tape, and disposable gloves. Amy had performed this procedure countless times during her training, but today she felt unusually nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the materials on the bedside table. "I'm going to change your bandages now, Isabella," Amy explained in the same gentle voice she had used during all their previous interactions. "I'll be very careful, and I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing each step of the way." Amy put on her gloves and carefully lifted Isabella's left arm. The bandage covered a small area where an IV had been inserted weeks earlier. The wound had healed well, leaving only a tiny mark on Isabella's pale skin. Amy began removing the old bandage with infinite care, moving more slowly than she normally would. "The healing looks excellent," Amy continued, speaking as she worked. "Your body has been working hard to get better, even while you've been resting. I'm going to clean this area now with some antiseptic. It might feel cool for a moment." As Amy applied the antiseptic solution with a soft cotton pad, she noticed something unusual. Isabella's fingers, which had remained completely still for 8 months, seemed to twitch almost imperceptibly. Amy paused, wondering if she had imagined it, but decided to continue with the procedure. "Now I'm going to apply a fresh bandage," Amy said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This will protect the area and keep everything clean. You're doing so well, Isabella. Your husband will be here this afternoon to visit you, like he does every day." Amy was securing the new bandage when she felt it, a definite movement in Isabella's arm. Not just a twitch this time, but an actual shift in muscle tone. Amy looked up at Isabella's face and gasped. Isabella's eyelids were fluttering, moving in a way they hadn't moved in 8 months. "Isabella?" Amy whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "Can you hear me?" The fluttering became more pronounced, and then, like watching a flower bloom in slow motion, Isabella's eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, blinking against the soft morning light, but they were definitely open. After 243 days of unconsciousness, Isabella Whitmore was looking at the world again. Amy's hand shook as she leaned closer. "Isabella, if you can hear me, try to blink once." Isabella's eyes, still cloudy with confusion, seemed to focus on Amy's face. Then deliberately and slowly, she blinked once. Amy felt tears streaming down her face, but she forced herself to stay professional. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez, and you're in the hospital. You've been in a coma for 8 months, but you're awake now. You're safe." Isabella's lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry from months of not speaking, and her vocal cords were weak from disuse. Amy quickly reached for the call button to alert the nursing staff, but she didn't want to leave Isabella's side. "Don't try to talk yet," Amy said gently. "Your throat needs time to remember how to work. Just rest and let me get some help." Amy pressed the emergency call button repeatedly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Within seconds, Nurse Maria burst through the door, followed quickly by 2 other staff members. "She's awake," Amy announced, her voice cracking with emotion. "Isabella is conscious." The room erupted into controlled chaos as medical personnel surrounded Isabella's bed. Someone called for Dr. Peterson, Another nurse began checking vital signs and someone else contacted the neurology department. But Amy stayed right beside Isabella, holding her hand and speaking in the same calm, reassuring voice that had become so familiar over the past weeks. There are a lot of people here now. But don't be frightened, Amy explained. They're all here to help you. Your vital signs look good and everyone is very excited that you're awake. Isabella's eyes darted around the room, taking in all the faces and activity, but they kept returning to Amy's face. There was recognition there, a connection that spoke of all those weeks when Amy had talked to her, believing she could hear every word. Dr. Peterson arrived within minutes, slightly out of breath from rushing down the hallway. His expression shifted from skepticism to amazement as he saw Isabella's alert eyes tracking movement around the room. "This is incredible," he muttered, immediately beginning his examination. "Isabella, I'm Dr. Peterson. Can you squeeze my hand if you understand me?" Isabella's grip was weak, but she managed a small squeeze. The monitoring equipment showed increased brain activity across all measures. Confirming what everyone could see, Isabella Whitmore had returned from the depths of unconsciousness. "We need to call her husband immediately," Amy said, still holding Isabella's other hand. "And we should contact neurology for a full assessment." As if on cue, Isabella's lips moved again, and this time a tiny whisper escaped. "Robert?" she managed to say, her voice barely audible but unmistakably real. Amy squeezed Isabella's hand gently. "Yes, we're calling Robert right now. He's been here every single day, talking to you, reading to you. He never gave up hope that you would come back to him." The next hour passed in a blur of medical tests, phone calls, and preparations. Robert arrived within 20 minutes, having broken several speed limits to get to the hospital. When he saw Isabella's eyes open and looking at him, he broke down completely, sobbing as he held her hand and whispered words of love and relief. The medical team worked efficiently around them, but Amy made sure that Isabella was never without someone familiar nearby. The awakening was miraculous, but Amy knew it was just the beginning of Isabella's long journey back to full recovery. What had started as a routine bandage change had become a medical miracle, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary breakthroughs happen during the most ordinary moments. Within 20 minutes of Isabella's awakening, Room 317 had transformed from a quiet sanctuary into a bustling hub of medical activity. Dr. Peterson rushed in with 2 other specialists, followed by a team of nurses who began checking all of Isabella's vital signs. The heart monitor showed elevated activity, but everything was within safe ranges for someone who had just emerged from an 8-month coma. Amy stepped back to give the senior doctors room to work, but she kept watching Isabella's face carefully. The woman's eyes were still open, moving slowly from person to person as if trying to understand where she was and what was happening. Her breathing was steady but shallow, and she seemed overwhelmed by all the sudden activity around her. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you hear me?" Dr. Peterson asked, shining a small flashlight into her eyes to check her pupil responses. "I'm Dr. Peterson. You're in the hospital and you're safe." Isabella's lips moved again, but still no sound came out. Her throat muscles hadn't been used for speaking in months, and it would take time for them to regain their strength. But her eyes showed clear understanding, and she nodded very slightly when Dr. Peterson asked if she was in any pain. Amy felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she watched the examination. This was the moment she had been hoping for, but she also knew that awakening from a long coma didn't guarantee a full recovery. Some patients experienced memory problems, difficulty speaking, or other complications that could last for months or even permanently. "Someone needs to call her husband immediately," Dr. Peterson said to Nurse Maria. "And we need to run a complete neurological assessment." This is extraordinary," Amy finally spoke up. "Dr. Peterson, I've been documenting Isabella's responses for the past month. I believe she's been aware of more than we realized, even while she appeared unconscious." Dr. Peterson looked at Amy with surprise. "What do you mean? What kind of responses?" Amy pulled out her notebook and quickly explained her observations about Isabella's brain activity changes, her reactions to different people and situations, and the patterns she had noticed during various procedures. As she spoke, Dr. Peterson's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine interest. "These are significant findings, Dr. Rodriguez," he said, studying her charts. "If what you're suggesting is true, it could change how we understand and treat coma patients. We need to document everything carefully. Meanwhile, Robert had been called at his office downtown. When he received the news that Isabella was awake, he dropped everything and raced to the hospital, his hands shaking as he drove through the rain-soaked streets. 8 months of hoping, praying, and refusing to give up had led to this moment, but he was almost afraid to believe it was real. When Robert burst into the hospital room, Isabella's eyes immediately found his face. For the first time since the accident, her husband could see recognition in her eyes. Tears streamed down both of their faces as Robert took her hand and kissed her forehead gently. "Isabella, my love, you came back to me," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I knew you would. I never stopped believing." Isabella squeezed his hand weakly but deliberately. It was the first clear communication she had made since opening her eyes, and everyone in the room felt the power of that moment. Love had been waiting patiently for 8 months, and now it was being rewarded. Over the next few hours, as Isabella's condition stabilized, something remarkable began to happen. She started making soft sounds, clearing her throat and trying to form words. The speech therapist who was called in explained that this was a very good sign. It meant her brain's language centers were functioning. By evening, Isabella managed to whisper her first word, "Robert." It was barely audible, but it was clear and intentional. Her husband's name was the first thing she wanted to say after months of silence. The neurologist who examined Isabella was amazed by her cognitive responses. She could follow simple commands, recognize familiar faces, and showed no signs of the severe brain damage that doctors typically expected after such a long coma. Her memory seemed largely intact, though she was understandably confused about how much time had passed. Amy stayed late that night, partly because she wanted to observe Isabella's recovery, and partly because she felt personally invested in her patient's journey back to consciousness. As the room finally quieted down and most of the medical team had left, Isabella looked at Amy with clear, grateful eyes. "Thank you," Isabella whispered, her voice getting slightly stronger with each attempt to speak. "I heard you, talking to me. You never gave up." Amy felt tears welling up in her eyes again. "You were fighting to come back, Isabella. I could see it in all the little signs. You were never really gone." Over the next 2 days, Isabella's recovery accelerated in ways that surprised even the most experienced doctors. She regained more of her voice, was able to sit up with assistance, and began eating soft foods. But the most shocking revelation came when she started talking about her experience during the coma. "I could hear everything," Isabella told Amy during one of their conversations. "I heard Robert reading to me every day. I heard the nurses talking. I knew when people were gentle with me, and when they weren't, I just couldn't respond." Amy leaned forward, fascinated. What was it like, being aware but unable to move or speak? Isabella was quiet for a moment, searching for the right words. Like being trapped underwater but still being able to see the surface. "I kept trying to swim up, to break through, but I couldn't reach it. Until that morning when you were changing my bandages. Your voice was different. You really believed I was there." The medical team was amazed by Isabella's descriptions of her conscious experience during the coma. She remembered specific conversations, particular pieces of music that had been played, and even the different scents of flowers that Robert had brought. It was clear evidence that some coma patients might be far more aware than anyone had previously understood. News of Isabella's recovery began to spread throughout the medical community. Doctors from other hospitals called to learn more about the case, and researchers expressed interest in studying her brain scans from before and after her awakening. Amy found herself being asked to speak at medical conferences about her observations and techniques. But perhaps the most important impact was on the hospital's approach to treating other coma patients. New protocols were established requiring gentler care, more personal interaction, and careful attention to subtle signs of awareness. Isabella's case had proven that sometimes miracles happen when people refuse to give up hope. Amy realized that this experience had changed her as a doctor. She had learned to trust her instincts, to look beyond what textbooks said was possible, and to never underestimate the power of treating patients with genuine care and compassion. Isabella's awakening wasn't just a medical miracle. It was a reminder of why she had chosen to become a doctor in the first place. 6 months after Isabella's miraculous awakening, the world looked completely different for everyone involved in her recovery. The story had spread far beyond City General Hospital, capturing the attention of medical professionals, researchers, and families dealing with similar situations around the globe. Isabella's physical recovery had been remarkable. What started as whispered words and weak hand squeezes had transformed into full conversations and steady movement. She had relearned how to walk, regained her strength through physical therapy, and most importantly, her sharp mind had returned completely intact. The art gallery owner, who had been trapped in silence for 8 months, was now back to discussing paintings, sculptures, and upcoming exhibitions with the same passion she had before the accident. But Isabella never forgot the experience of being conscious but unable to communicate. The memory of those months stayed with her, and she felt a deep responsibility to help other families who might be going through similar situations. She had wealth, influence, and now a story that could change medical practices forever. "I want to start a foundation," Isabella told Amy during one of her follow-up appointments, "something that focuses on coma research and training healthcare workers to recognize signs of awareness. What happened to me shouldn't be rare. It should be the standard of care." Amy was amazed by Isabella's determination. Most people who had survived such an ordeal would want to put it behind them and return to normal life. But Isabella seemed energized by the possibility of helping others. "What would you want the foundation to do exactly?" Isabella had clearly given this a lot of thought. "First, we need to fund research into consciousness during comas. There must be other patients out there who are aware but can't show it. Second, we need to train doctors and nurses to look for the subtle signs that you noticed in me. And third, we need to change the way hospitals treat coma patients, with more dignity, more personal attention, and more hope." Within 3 months, the Isabella Whitmore Foundation for Conscious Care was officially established. Isabella and Robert donated $2 million to get it started, and they recruited some of the country's top neurologists and researchers to serve on the board. Amy was asked to be the foundation's first medical advisor, a role that would change the direction of her entire career. The foundation's first major project was developing new training programs for healthcare workers. Amy found herself traveling to hospitals across the country, teaching doctors and nurses how to recognize the tiny signs of awareness that most medical professionals had been trained to ignore. She would tell Isabella's story and then demonstrate the observation techniques that had led to the breakthrough. Look for patterns in brain activity, changes in breathing, responses to familiar voices, Amy would explain to groups of medical professionals. "These patients might be fighting to communicate with us, but we have to learn their language first." The response was overwhelming. Hospitals began reporting cases of patients who had been assumed unconscious, but were showing signs of awareness when staff looked more carefully. Some of these patients eventually woke up, just like Isabella had. Others remained in comas, but their families found comfort in knowing that their loved ones might be able to hear them. One of the most touching success stories came from a hospital in Texas. A teenage boy who had been in a coma for 6 months after a motorcycle accident began, showing the subtle response patterns that Amy had taught the staff to recognize. When they started treating him with the same gentle personal care that had helped Isabella, he woke up within 2 weeks. The boy's mother called Amy personally to thank her. "My son told me he could hear everything we said to him," she said through tears of joy. He said the nurses who talked to him like he was awake gave him hope to keep fighting. "If you hadn't taught them to look for those signs, we might have given up." Isabella's foundation also funded cutting-edge research into brain imaging techniques that could detect consciousness in unresponsive patients. Scientists developed new ways to communicate with coma patients using brain scans, allowing them to answer simple yes or no questions by thinking about specific activities. The research was revolutionary and gave hope to thousands of families around the world. Amy's own life had been transformed by Isabella's case. She had become one of the most respected young neurologists in the country, but more importantly, she had found her true calling. She established a special unit at City General Hospital, dedicated to treating long-term coma patients with the personalized, hopeful approach that had worked with Isabella. "Every patient deserves to be treated as if they might wake up tomorrow," Amy would tell new medical students. "We might not always be able to bring them back, but we can make sure they know they're loved and cared for while they're fighting their way back to us." The impact went beyond just medical practice. Families of coma patients began advocating for better care, demanding that hospitals treat their loved ones with the same attention and respect they would want for themselves. The foundation provided resources and support groups for these families, helping them navigate the difficult journey of loving someone who couldn't respond. Isabella became a sought-after speaker at medical conferences and universities. Her story was featured in medical journals, news programs, and documentaries, but she always made sure that Amy received equal recognition for the discovery that had saved her life. "Dr. Rodriguez saw me when others couldn't," Isabella would say during her speeches. She proved that sometimes the most important medical tool isn't a machine or a medication, it's a caring heart and the refusal to give up on someone. 3 years after her awakening, Isabella's art galleries were thriving again, and she had become a powerful advocate for medical reform. The foundation had helped change protocols at over 200 hospitals and had funded research that was leading to new treatments for brain injuries. Amy continued her work at the hospital, but now she split her time between patient care and research. She had published several papers on consciousness in coma patients and was working on a book about her experiences with Isabella and other patients who had defied medical expectations. The most rewarding part of Amy's work was the letters she received from families whose loved ones had benefited from the new approaches to coma care, parents whose children had awakened, spouses who had been reunited with their partners, and adult children who had gotten their parents back, all because medical professionals had learned to look for the signs that Amy had first noticed in Isabella. Medicine isn't just about treating diseases, Amy would tell her students. It's about recognizing the humanity in every patient, even when they can't speak for themselves. Isabella taught me that consciousness can exist in the quietest places, and our job is to listen carefully enough to hear it. The story that had started with a young doctor's intuition and a gentle bandage change had grown into a movement that was changing lives around the world. Isabella's voice, silent for 8 months, had become a powerful force for hope and healing in the medical community. And in room 317 at City General Hospital, where Isabella had once lay motionless, a new patient now rested. But this time the medical team knew to look for the subtle signs, to speak with kindness, and to never give up hope that somewhere behind closed eyes, a person might be fighting to come home.